when I started teaching, I was always really passionate about play and children's right to play. I'd been taught that curriculum should be play-based and that educators needed to structure their curriculum such that play was at the centre of the curriculum. I was a really big player as a child, and I was what Betty Jones might call a master player. My friend Natalie and I used to play for hours at dramatic play. We used to transport all our toys down to her front veranda, which was enclosed on 3 sides, and we'd play for hours and hours and hours as young children. So play was a very seductive notion to me in early childhood because it connected me back to my own childhood experiences of being with friends and being away from other adults and having a wonderful time and spending many hours engaged in that activity. So in the early years of my career, I really focused on creating wonderful play environments for children, wonderful opportunities for rich dramatic play. I am a master at digging out the most fantastic water courses in sandpits, to have boats floating around the sandpit and getting children involved, or everybody digging and making a huge sandcastle. So lots of outdoor play as well. I love home corners because I loved the miniature nature of it and the dolls and the dressing up and all of those kinds of things. So they were very important. As my career developed though, I started to look differently, and as I became more involved in anti-bias work, and then in terms of thinking about perhaps some of the post-structural and the critical theories that were challenging me to think about the dynamics of power and the relationship of the individual to the group, I started to see my early childhood environment differently. I also remember the day when things really changed for me. I finally managed to get these boys who ran a lot and who knocked over things and who controlled a lot of spaces in the centre, and I got them in the digging patch, and I was so excited because they were in the digging patch all morning and they were digging rivers and they had pots and all those kinds of things, and it was busy and it was active and there was good questioning happening. I didn't actually pay attention to the fact that there wasn't a single girl involved. Then there was fruit time, and the boys left, and into the sandpit, into the digging patch came the girls, who kind of got to play in the boys' mess. And then it was packing up time. And I remember this little girl walking by, and I asked her to help me clean up the digging patch. There wasn't a boy in sight. And I remember at the time thinking it was easier to ask a girl to do it than to go and get a boy and find a boy to do it. And then I was absolutely horrified by the fact that that's what I'd thought. And I'd realised that I'd actually probably been doing that all of my career. That was the moment I started to see things really differently in my centre. I started to see how relationships worked really differently. I also had an outer space room, which was a fabulous play space that once again the boys dominated. And I thought I was doing great gender equity, and I made a decision that all the boys can stay out of this space today. It's a girls' day to use the space room. And I turned around and there was a little boy called Jonathan standing there looking at me. He didn't play with boys, he only played with girls. And I just said, it's girls' day in the space room. And Jonathan was like, where do I go? So I said, it's the girls' day and Jonathan's day in the space room. But it didn't resolve the issue for me. But what the critical work did was really started me seeing different things that I had never actually seen happening in my kindergarten before. They were always there, I just didn't see them. The other one that became really dominant for me was what I call the birthday party curriculum. If you don't give me the swing, I won't invite you to my birthday party. And what I'd learnt from my child development studies that I didn't really understand when I was a student teacher was that the reason children did that was because they didn't really have the social skills to behave appropriately. That's not what I saw at all. What I saw was power. What I saw was children manipulating and controlling other children to get what they wanted. So those original notions I had of play as being this lovely, dramatic, romantic kind of experience, I suddenly started to see different dynamics happening within those that I really needed to pay attention to as a teacher, but I didn't know how to deal with those things, because none of the child development theories tell me how to deal with those things. Those things tell me that it's because children are not old enough to know. They need to develop social skills. These children have got social skills. These children are using their social skills very well to include and exclude certain children. I think the other thing about that is that they don't just exclude and include other children, they use each other, or they use themes to include and exclude each other. So in the last kindergarten I was at, I watched these children for several weeks playing the Saddle Club. And I noticed that everybody in the Saddle Club game wanted to be Stevie. And I didn't know anything about the Saddle Club, but the Saddle Club is, for those people who don't know it, I guess is a television show about these girls who ride horses and they're part of a club. And there are three main characters called Carol, Lisa and Stevie. And everybody wanted to be Stevie. They used the A-frames. It looked like fantastic dramatic play. They used the A-frames and they were riding on the A-frames and they were playing Saddle Club and everyone was fighting about who was Stevie. And I don't know what made me ask the question one day, because I by this stage found out there were three characters called Carol, Lisa and Stevie, but I knew nothing about them. And what I knew was that everybody wanted to be Stevie, but if you didn't get to be Stevie, well, you'd be Lisa. You didn't really want to be Lisa, but you'd take Lisa, but nobody would be Carol. And I don't know why I asked it one day, but I just said, what colour is Carol? And they said, she's brown. And what I realised was there was this whole theme of race running through this dramatic play that looked like wonderful imaginative play. People have said to me, oh, you're imagining things. That's not exclusion, that's not racism. And when I say, well, what would it look like if children were being racist? They say, well, they'd exclude people. And my answer is they did. They excluded Carol. Carol was the brown character, she was excluded. So the anti-bias work combined with the post-structure and the critical theories have really, I guess, made me see a different terrain. When I look at children, I don't see what I saw when I started teaching, and therefore what I need to do with children is not the same as what I did when I started teaching. How I interact, what I'll say to children, what I won't say to children, what I won't allow children to say to each other, that I'll be quite active in stopping, has really changed, because I don't think play is this nice romantic thing. And when I think back to my own childhood now, I can think about the times where I was mean to people that I played with, and that we ran away from people, and that we hid from people, and that people did those things to me, and I didn't like it, and nobody paid attention to it. I think we have to pay attention to those kinds of things.
The Early Years Learning Framework has challenged notions of free or discovery play, because it talks about play-based education, and it talks about connecting play-based education with intentional teaching, with learning and with outcomes. And these are quite different and somewhat unusual for early childhood educators to have a curriculum document talking about intentional teaching, to have a curriculum document talking about learning as well as child development and privileging that. And it's quite unusual to have a document for children from birth to 5 talking about outcomes, and encouraging educators to document children's learning in terms of outcomes. So really the Early Years Learning Framework is challenging traditional notions of play, that is, child-centred and discovery type play. Those notions have been unchallenged in early childhood education for a long time, and Rousseau's ideas about play have influenced how we think about play and what children should do and can do with play. And they continue to do so today. As a romantic naturalist, Rousseau believed that play was a natural thing for children to do, and he advocated freedom and activity, especially in the natural environment. And those ideas have pervaded our thinking about play in early childhood education, and they cause us to think that children should be allowed to play freely and engage in discovery type play. But with the Early Years Learning Framework now putting education and play together, That requires educators to think about play in different ways from just free play or discovery play. So what does play-based education look like, and how might it be different from free play or discovery play that is characteristic of many early childhood settings? And importantly for me, how will this play be equitable? We know from qualitative studies that have been undertaken in early childhood education that play often reproduces the status quo. That is, it reproduces what exists in society in terms of relations of power about race, gender, social, economic and cultural capital, ethnicity, heteronormativity and proficiency with English. So coming back to play, given that the qualitative studies have shown that play can reproduce the status quo, with the early years learning framework challenging notions of free play, how then can educators work with play-based education, particularly if they've been focusing on free play or discovery play in their approaches? One way is to rethink, to challenge what has always been, to rethink some of those ideas that we still hold dear from Rousseau, to challenge the idea that children should have free play opportunities as the total experience for their time in early childhood centres. But to rethink, we need to draw on alternative theoretical perspectives about that enable us to theorise in different ways from what we might theorise if we're using child development theories alone.
The Early Years Learning Framework highlights the importance of play in early childhood curriculum. Play's always had a very important part in early childhood curriculum. I think what's changed over the years perhaps is the educator's role in children's play. From a developmental perspective, educators would set up the environment, encourage children to play and observe children's learning, but be very reluctant to step in and actually engage in the play with children for fear of taking control of the play or taking over children's learning. The Early Years Learning Framework also talks about intentional teaching, so we need to look at how we put those two things together, how we can become engaged in children's play in ways that are very sensitive to and responsive to children's ideas and passions, and scaffold learning in a way that is not taking over children's play, but using their ideas and asking questions and making comments that challenge and provoke children's thinking, so that we can combine those ideas about intentional teaching with play. So intentional teaching is not about transmission of content, educators doing lots of large group experiences. It's about engaging with small groups of children around things that children are interested in and adding particular ideas or asking particular questions or suggesting new resources that might help children to take their learning to another level.
She says, play contains your questions, and I must know what questions you are asking before mine will be useful. An idea must find the rhythm of the group to be fully communicated. We speak of surprises, seldom of certainties. We want to talk about what we don't understand and what has not worked out according to expectations. And again, there are words and actions already known, but in the shared space become the language of social connection, of reaching out, touching and being touched. And in relation to Jason regularly proves to me that children adapt best to school through the culture they themselves invent. Jason is not a slow learner. He is a cautious researcher.
So what does it take for early childhood educators to change practices and incorporate intentional teaching and outcomes into their daily work? Often it means using different theoretical perspectives from those that we usually draw on in early childhood education. To see the inequities that can occur in children's play means looking from different perspectives to understand how power relations are operating and as a result marginalise some children. Educators can then take action in situations where they may not have previously. Likewise, To be able to blend play and education with intentional teaching and outcomes means looking at things differently and using alternative theoretical perspectives. An example of change that comes to mind is drawn from some work I'm currently doing with educators on an action learning project. The educators at an outside school hours care service decided to challenge the regulations about tree climbing. They now have tree climbing as a regular activity in their program. Parents were involved in the decision, and children have developed their own rules about what safe tree climbing practice is in terms of the trees that can be climbed, the number of people in each tree, and what to do if you want to climb when there are other people in the trees. They've also discussed things like footwear that's appropriate for tree climbing. It's made a difference to the daily activities that some children engage in, but it's also led to other changes. Staff were keen to provide children with opportunities to play in the rain, and after they consulted parents, they provided boots, umbrellas and raincoats for children to use. And the children really enjoy these experiences of splashing in the mud and walking in the rain. While I can't do justice to the planning and hard work that was required to make these changes in this short space of time, this long-term change has been very popular with the children and the parents and the staff. These examples don't directly address play-based education, intentional teaching and outcomes, but they do provide recent examples of early childhood educators challenging the rules and making alternatives possible. They act as encouragement and as inspiration to others who are embarking on change by showing what is possible to achieve and how it might be done.
When we're looking at literacy learning, for example, it's very important to look at how we can use play as a way of engaging children with literacy. So it might be around setting up play environments that relate to children's family and community experiences. So it might be a cafe or a restaurant or McDonald's, or it might be a vet shop, it might be a garage. It really needs to link to children's family and community experiences, not to the educator's experience. Setting up the environment with lots of literacy artefacts is important, but it's also very important that the educator joins in that play with the children. By joining in the play, you're able to model literacy practices, you're able to talk with children about processes and concepts of literacy, you're able to scaffold children's literacy learning. So you might work with children to create a sign for their garage or their pet shop, for example, so that you can model and talk about uppercase and lowercase letters. You can talk about punctuation. You can talk about the way that we use print to express ideas, to give people information, to help us remember what it is that we need to buy at the shops, and so on. So the role of the educator in that literacy enriched play is crucial. Play is a really good way to support children's literacy and numeracy learning, so we can set up literacy and numeracy enriched environments that encourage children to experiment with print, to try out their ideas about literacy and numeracy in a very natural, risk-free environment, and something that they can relate to their everyday social practice. And while it's really important to create those sorts of environments that are enriched with literacy and numeracy artefacts, there's no point in doing that if we don't actually become actively involved ourselves. We can set up beautiful environments, we can have lots of pencils and paper and scales and rulers, and children may not engage with those resources or may not use them in ways that are actually extending their literacy and numeracy understandings. It's really important that the educator becomes involved in the play, takes on a role in the children's play, so they might be a customer at the restaurant or someone who's come to buy some things from the shop, and they relate the importance of literacy to children through the way that they interact in those situations. So they might say, oh, how do I know how much this costs? We need to maybe have some signs with some prices. Or how are you going to write down what I want to order at the cafe? Do you have somewhere to write down the orders? So that children naturally then take on roles of literacy and numeracy users in the play when they're scaffolded to do that through the educator being actively involved.